Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us in today's webinar. So this is about racially aggravated hate crime. My name is Farah Farzana, and I'm the Equalities and Human Rights Officer for Falkirk Council. So we'll do a wee quick round of introductions with colleagues, and then we'll get started.
Thanks very much, Farah. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Gemma Ritchie, and I'm the Adult Support and Protection Lead Officer in Falkirk.
Hi everyone, I'm Lee Allen. I'm the Lead Officer for Child Protection in Falkirk.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Finnegan and I'm the Lead Officer for Gender-Based Violence and Violence Against Women and Girls in Falkirk.
Good afternoon everyone, I'm Phil Heaton, I'm the Alcohol and Drug Partnership Lead Officer for Falkirk.
Good afternoon, I'm Lee Strang, I'm the Sergeant for Forth Valleys Preventions, Partnerships and Interventions team.
Good afternoon, I'm Gillian Curry. I am from the Central Scotland Regional Equality Council.
Hi everyone, I'm Nicola Bruce. I'm the Community Justice Partnership Coordinator.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And it's absolutely wonderful to see such a great turnout as well in today's webinar. So just briefly moving on. So the purpose of today's webinar is to build confidence in recognising and reporting hate crime. And what we'll be doing is we'll be analysing the impact of racially aggravated hate crime on young people, understanding intersectionality of hate crime, mental health, including suicide risk, and applying public protection values to hate crime strategy aims. So I'll hand over to our first guest speaker, who is Sergeant Lee Strang, who will talk about what is hate crime, what's the new legislation, etc.
I'm not going to read the whole slide out to everybody. I'll just speak as people are reading it. But basically, a hate crime is perceived by a victim or any other person to be motivated by malice or ill will towards that characteristic group. So that changed. That's always been the definition. However, it was put in the legislation in the Hate Crime and Public Order Scotland Act in 2021. And the protected characteristics you can see on the right, that is everything that comes under that act. In 2021, we added age and variation in sex characteristics. That's what came in through that. It's pretty self-explanatory. So if you're talking about the character of disability, is it physical or mental impairment of any kind? Race as a group can be defined as a racial group. Shared race, sorry if you heard that, my phone was ringing. Nationality or ethnic and national origins. Religion is a group defined with a reference of a religion, and the person's defined by that reference and their religious beliefs. So that is the definition of hate crime. That's what's covered under that. The changes in the legislation that was implemented in 2024, so we'll have an acronym, so HCPOA is the Hate Crime Public Order Act. So we used to use Section 50, that was how we recorded hate crimes under the civic government. That's now, hate crime has its own act, and as mentioned before, the age and variation of sexual characteristics, they've been added as protected characteristics, but also the ability to add hate instance. So before, a hate crime was a hate crime, but there was no real way of recording something that was an instance. So what we refer to that would be as if something was perceived to be a hate crime, however it didn't amount to criminality or constitute a criminal offence, would still be recorded, so that we could still look at those numbers, see what characteristics are impacted, and also drives the ability to see the under-reporting of characteristics, because that is something that unfortunately some characteristics don't report things, and part of today is talk about how to report that and ways to overcome that. My key advice would be that if you think something's not right and it's linked to hate, still tell us and let us make that decision based on crime recording standards, but everyone's treated with the same importance, and then is given that will be an update as in we're not treated as a crime, however it's been recorded as a hate incident. So the key legal parts for that, again, we added the aggravations of offences by prejudice, racial aggravated harassment, offences stirring up hatred, and the protection of freedom of expression. The aggravation is that circumstances, they have to be corroborated for the crime to have occurred. Acts of hate must be demonstrated immediately before or during. So if it was an assault, but there was no hate element to that, it would still be recorded as assault. However, if on the lead up to that there was a witness or some sort of comment to say what motivated that assault. So for example, if someone who identified as being gay was assaulted, and prior to that assault someone heard him saying, "I'm going to smash that," whatever terminology they want to use, that is how we would use that in terms of that aggravation. The offences stirring up hatred, that is it's a difficult one in the sense of there has to be certain parts of that fulfill it. So they have to behave in a manner which would be considered threatening or abusive. The person intends to stir up hatred, is likely to stir up hatred, or is likely to stir up the hatred in the group. They have to behave in a manner, as I said, which would be considered to be threatening or abusive. So there is offences which are just for being threatening or abusive, but we've added that, or the government have added in that legislation which covers that under hate crime. And I will come on to freedom of expression next. Again, I am not going to read that entire slide, but it's important to note. So there's various ones, and it's quite a topic at this point in time in Falkirk. So Article 10 of the Human Rights, it gives us the right to communicate, express ourselves in any medium, which includes words, pictures, and actions. It is often used to defend press freedom and protect journalists, which is fine, and that is it. But it also covers that political expression, the peaceful protest and demonstrations, and it protects that popular and unpopular expression with certain limitations, and those limitations are around national security, territorial integrity, or public safety, preventing that disorder of crime. When we talk about the disorder or crime, it's not necessarily, it's not low level disorder or low level crime. It has to have a serious, or what is deemed a serious part, before we can interfere with that human right. Protecting health or morals, again, if something is occurring in terms of a protest which prevents someone from seeking medical help or going to a hospital, again, that's where the human rights aspect of freedom of expression can be interfered with. Protecting people's reputation or rights, preventing the disclosure of information received in confidence, and maintaining the authority or impartiality of judiciary. That's all the legal speak. The main parts I would cover in there would be the preventing disorder or crime, and it has to be of that serious nature. If we are going to intervene, it has to be so graphic or so offensive that it has to hit one or more of those limitations. An example I would give for that is that where we were challenged in terms of the police in Edinburgh in 2017. There was a kind of public photo display in the city centre, and the images depicted were around the conflicts in Palestine. And they showed relatively graphic images of a deceased male and children being restrained by soldiers. The officers that went did actually take action on it, however, were then held responsible for breaching a human right because it was deemed that the photos weren't actually so graphic as to hit one of those limitations that I talked about. That's just to try and bring that to life a wee bit. And I will now hand over to Gillian.
Hello, just give me 1 wee second. So hi everyone. I'm just going to do a little bit of an introduction of who I am, who CESREC are, because some of you might not have heard of us before. So my name is Gillian Curry and I'm the Operation Manager for the Central Scotland Regional Equality Council. And I know we have a very long name, so we get called CESREC for short. And we are a race, equality and human rights charity supporting ethnic minority communities in Central Scotland, and we've been operating for over 40 years. We're currently based in Stirling, but we cover the whole Central Scotland area. We offer outreach sessions still in Falkirk and Clacks. So CESREC are working to improve the lives and outcomes for people from ethnic minority backgrounds, working to end discrimination and facilitating partnerships between local communities for a Central Scotland where everyone is treated fairly, with respect and dignity, and enjoys equal opportunities to thrive. So we do quite a lot of different things within our role as a charity, but some of the most relevant for the session here today would be that, one, we are a local hate crime third-party reporting centre. We have a wider support and advice service, which is similar to what the Citizens Advice Bureaus can provide, but our service is specifically for our ethnic minority communities. We can help with a wide range of topics, including like access and public services, welfare benefits, housing, employment, inequality and discrimination. We're also able to provide immigration advice for free to people in Central Scotland. We're the only place in Central Scotland that offers that advice for free, and that's through our IAA Level 1 immigration advisors, so they can assist with immigration inquiries, which include asylum and protection and the EU settlement scheme. And finally, we are involved in the racism and racist incident work stream, which is with the Scottish Government. This feeds in directly to informing what schools do in Scotland, for example, policies around racist incidents, and helping to inform the anti-racist approach within schools. And our website is listed there if you feel urged to, to look us up separately from that.
Gillian, sorry to butt in. Could you just outline what a third-party reporting centre is, just in case not everybody's aware of what that is?
Yep, so a third-party reporting centre is where either a witness or a victim to a hate crime or what's perceived to be a hate crime, we are a separate centre that's held separately from the police that people can report to. So if they don't feel confident enough or safe enough to kind of report directly to the police, we are here to take any reports in. We are a racial equality charity altogether, but since we are a third-party reporting centre, we would take any report of hate crime can be reported to us. There are other local reporting centres, but we are one of them. So it's basically just a service that people can come to, kind of safe space. It can also be reported anonymously through a third-party reporting centre if people are not confident enough, if they don't want to have their name necessarily attached, but they want to have a record of something that's happened. That's a way that people can still access that service. Sorry, I should have went a little bit more in depth about specifically what that is.
Thanks.
So now that you know a little bit about who we are, I'd like to speak about some of the local issues that we've seen. So the big one that's happening just now is obviously the local protests. So just to touch on that to begin with. So the local protests have revealed undercurrent of hate that has been swept under the rug within our community and has now been brought kind of undeniably in front of everyone. There can be no denying the issues that have been brought forward from this. The protests are fueled by agendas that are politically motivated, and they're using race and religion in some cases to aggravate. And unfortunately, this is happening towards some of the most vulnerable people in our communities. And some of the real local concerns are being hijacked and used to further hate. This is not only happening towards those seeking asylum, but towards the wider migrant community as well. We have received direct community feedback that local families feel fearful and unsafe to be in town at certain times of the day, which is especially prevalent on days of the protests, for fear that they will end up a target. Some local shops have also decided to close on protest days, again, for fear that they may become a target, which is not helping the local community or those people's livelihoods. Some people are feeling completely isolated due to the protests, and they're restricted to either being forced to stay at home or forced to get out of Falkirk altogether, if that's something that they're able to even do. This sentiment has been shared with us by parents, families, and by the men seeking asylum within the hotel. The wider migrant communities are feeling the repercussions from the protests, and although it's not something that's maybe necessarily reportable as a hate crime, they have been sharing their experiences with us. So Cedric have been supporting the residents of the Claddon directly, and we are doing weekly check-in visits to provide support and just be a listening ear for them. We've also pushed for direct community outreach between them and the police, which is now started up. Many of the men had felt fearful of the police, that they really hadn't had much engagement outside of that, but instead they've maybe just only seen them from outside of their window. It's our hope that with continued engagement, they will know that the police are there to keep our community safe, and that they'll feel empowered enough to engage with them where that might be necessary. Police and community engagement is very important also for the wider community, to try and alleviate some of the fear that people might associate, and to help build trust. So there has been quite a heavy presence of young people attending the protests, mostly alongside their family members. During the last 2 weeks, Cedric have received 2 separate requests from support from local families who have experienced bullying and racially motivated abuse within schools themselves, one of which actually has led to a physical attack. The families are obviously very upset with the whole situation, and we have been doing our best to support both the parents and the children. It is very unusual for us to receive reports like this at such a frequency. We can't say that they're being directly caused by the protests, but with tensions being so high, it is not surprising to us that it's also causing issues with our children. There is bound to be confusing messages for children that are overhearing different conversations and messaging, and what they may be hearing at home is not the same message that is trying to be delivered in schools to call for cohesion. And we feel that more needs to be done to tackle this directly with the children involved, or this could be a growing cause for concern. Sorry, pardon me. There is hesitation around hate crime reporting in our communities. That is not something that's easy to tackle. So people are scared or unwilling to report hate for many reasons. With repeated visits to places, we can see directly the impact on the mental well-being of victims, both adults and children, which are significant enough to cause anxiety and stress, and in some cases actually causing physical illness in people who are already traumatised. One such reason for the hesitation to report is that when people have already gone through such a traumatising event, they are forced to relive going through the same story time and again in order to be able to make a report, and then for the investigation that follows. We can't force people to report, but it is our role to make people feel assured, safe and supported throughout the whole process, to make them feel heard and listened to. And it's not our role to decide whether something, what they've faced is an actual crime, but our role is there to make the police's job just a little bit easier in gathering evidence and providing that safe, encouraging environment for victims or witnesses to feel confident enough to report. It is important to acknowledge that this is not an issue that only you might be facing, and that you're not alone in the potential unwillingness to report. the impact of trauma is much larger than expected, and even those who are knowledgeable of their rights will find it extremely difficult to navigate through the system due to trauma. And one last important thing to note is that people don't always present to report a hate crime directly, but they may come seeking support for another issue that they're facing. And when they're being listened to and they're expressing their concerns, alongside us asking the right questions in order for them to be able to open up, we can at times reveal that there's actually an undercurrent of hate there. So to give an example of this situation, we had been approached by a local family. They were seeking for help. They were looking for help, to do with a housing issue. So they wanted to move and they were just looking for our help to go through that process. During our initial appointment with them, when we were gathering information, it appeared that the reason that they wanted to move in the first place actually was stemming from hate crime and bullying from neighbours, which was the only reason that they were looking to move in the first place. So not everyone will come to you and present and tell you that they've been a victim of a hate crime or incident, or they might not feel in that moment necessarily that they have been victimised, but looking back on the situation, that will kind of spark like, oh yeah, that is how I feel. But it might come under other umbrellas, and if you care enough to ask the right questions and if you're able to get through to someone, you'll find that the core issues potentially isn't really housing or overcrowding or neighbourhood disputes, but that it's actually their experiences of being racialised, which is something that needs to be addressed. And we all have a role to play to ensure that our communities feel safe, even when things might not feel so straightforward.
Thank you so much for that input, Gillian and Lee. So the next part we'll look into is playing this video, and it's essentially the case study that we're going to be then talking.
Can anyone smell pakora?
He's pure honking, man.
Nobody sit beside Aya. She'll try to convert you.
She's probably got a bomb in there.
Okay, settle down. Aya, could you sit here, please? I don't want you sitting by yourself.
Are you okay, Aya? You need to speak to your guidance teacher. This can't go on. I'm sorry I didn't stick up for you in class. A lot of us want to.
It's okay. I understand.
I can assure you we take racism very seriously in this school. We won't tolerate it in any way. We will deal with it. We want all our pupils to feel safe. I'll make the head teacher aware of the situation, okay?
Grass.
Yeah, that's right. Aya won't be coming into school today. She's in hospital. Could you get the head teacher to call me as soon as possible? Thanks. Can you get me the police, please?
Lead officers as an opportunity to actually provide some more up-to-date information on another really important strand of our public protection lead officers group. She couldn't make it along today, but Stacey McIntosh is the strategic prevention coordinator for suicide and substance use deaths. And what we're going to do following the webinar is we're going to send you round some information to get some updates on the work that Stacey has been leading on. That includes it was to mark Suicide Prevention Day in September, that actually in Forth Valley they published their first local suicide prevention newsletter. I've had a look at it myself, and it's one of the things that we're going to circulate to you all, and it really is excellent. People were talking about learning and development opportunities there. It covers that. It covers lots of really interesting information, both about local activity and national activity. So really worth a read. And there was lots of things that I wasn't aware of. So I'm sure I'll not be the only person there. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. The plan is that that's going to be published quarterly, so there'll be ongoing opportunities to receive that newsletter. She also shared information around data for suicide across Forth Valley and in Falkirk as well, so to share that with you as well. Also covered within the newsletter is the new website, National Suicide Prevention website, which is not only a resource for you to make people you might be working with, families, carers, communities aware of, but it's also a resource for you as practitioners as well. I think it's very similar if anybody's seen the Self-Harm Network national website, that is a place for people who are experiencing, people who might be in a caring role, but also a place for professionals to go to upskill yourselves, increase your knowledge around about suicide. The other thing that I really just wanted to highlight to you as well, and again, it's covered within the newsletter. It really is an excellent newsletter covering a lot of different areas, information and resources, is the suicide prevention podcast. Called What If, really focusing on time, space and compassion. Now, you can listen to this for free on different podcast apps. I'd listened to it recently using Podbean, and when I went on to have a look, there's a number of different episodes. They're about 30 minutes in length each, but what was really helpful is actually their last episode. It really covers the areas that we're covering today. It's about the experiences of suicide within marginalised groups, and it's titled What If You Feel You Don't Fit In, as you can see there on the slide. And I've listened to it a couple of times. I just thought it was such an excellent podcast with different panel members that are on it. So I would encourage you to have a read. And I was just making some notes as I was doing it around about some of the key things that it brought in, and it was talking about. And Gillian picked up on quite a bit of this when she was sharing some information about local issues, but it was really talking about within the podcast and the panel members about people being unique or people's identity, and if there's difficulties around their feelings of safety and security, it can really increase the risk of concerns around their mental health, and including suicide. That we all need to feel safe and secure in our communities, and where we don't, the effect that can have on, and that can be about how society treats marginalised groups and their experiences around about that. negative stereotypes, and particularly for young people as well, within the video clip that we played. So a really important area of public protection for us to have a keen focus on. So as I said, we'll make sure that you receive all that full information, and would encourage you to review it and utilise it.
Looking at the scenario, and we think about, okay, so what about a trauma-informed response? We know individuals are more likely to experience trauma through being victims of hate crimes, as they may have experienced significant emotional, psychological, or even physical harm. So, as for example, within the video when we heard about Aya, she was constantly called names, feeling left alone, quite isolated as well, and even to the point where, you know, she was physically spat on, so physically she didn't feel safe either. And looking at how does that actually impact on people. So again, just mentioning, touching on what has previously been mentioned about the impact on a person's sense of safety and belonging. The impact also looks like a trigger, or it can be compounding to any existing trauma. And this in turn can lead to long-term effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So essentially, we're looking at a complete decline in what makes an individual themselves. And we know that those impacted are less likely to be able to access the appropriate support. And the whole purpose of taking a trauma-informed response is that if we don't respond in ways that adapt to the impact of trauma and reduce the barriers it can create, we risk a society in which those of us who have experienced the most harm and have the greatest need have the least opportunity to access the specialist and universal services that we need. So again, the purpose of today is looking at racially aggravated hate crime and looking at the trauma that can stem from that as well. So when we're looking at trauma, what does it actually mean to have a trauma-informed and responsive system? We're talking about prioritising safety, choice, empowerment, trust, and collaboration. So working with the victim of the crime, or even the incident, because sometimes incidences can compound into trauma as well. When we have a trauma-informed and responsive system, it looks at helping to rebuild trust through compassionate, consistent, and culturally sensitive engagement. We know hate crimes are often rooted in structural inequalities, so therefore trauma-informed systems should understand the intersection of trauma and oppression. And again, working collectively to address bias, discrimination, and any exclusion within practice. So these slides were kindly put together and provided by Cheryl Aitken, who is our Reformed Practice Development Officer. That's is Cheryl's title. But basically, one of the things, for example, that we seen within the video was how Aya was reporting this to her teacher, and the teacher, it felt like, took it very lightly. Oh yes, okay, then we'll go ahead, we'll report it to the head teacher, and sort of that. There was such lack of empathy from that teacher and taking it very seriously, and that's unfortunately it is quite a common case, especially within schools, and what that comes across to young people. Tends to be that they're not taking me seriously, or I'm not being believed. So I think being here today, it's really important to make sure that we get that message across, that for anybody who's bringing up any issues, particularly within hate crime and it's racism, that we do make sure that they feel heard, and we do treat it with urgency rather than, okay, we'll wait until, this next teacher comes in, and then because they're the person that's supposed to be dealing with this, etc. And just understanding the fact that the concept of this happens over a long period of time. Again, looking back on that case, but it's very highly unlikely that a couple of days of this happening would have led to Aya decide to take that step of taking an overdose. So the fact that, this often goes unreported for a good length of time, and it's only when somebody sort of loses hope or has that lack of trust within the authority that's when they feel very helpless, and that's when the mental health goes into decline. So it is really quite important that, you know, we take back, we learn from these experiences and look to see what can we do within our spheres of control to help support people who are affected by racially aggravated hate crime as well. So I'm going to pass back over to Sergeant Lee Strang about how to report hate crime.
In terms of reporting hate crime, like, everybody's encouraged to report it. And I said earlier on, it's one of those ones where even if you think, oh, it's not quite right, or I don't know if that is a crime, let us make that decision. That applies to all crimes effectively, because there is something that the Scottish Crime Recording Standards is something that we all as officers know what's in, or we would seek advice on that. Hate crime in all its senses across all the protected characteristics can take on different guises, different emotions for everybody else. And we do have, as well as ways to report it and how it's treated, we have hate crime champions, hate crime advisors who can have that specialist knowledge, and then if there's something that we're not really sure about, we'd refer it on to them. So there's different levels of how we would establish it as a hate crime, and it kind of goes back to what Farah was saying. There's almost the teacher in that, and I know we'll come on to our own reflections, are almost that kind of passing on. Every hate crime is prioritised within whatever area it's reported, whether it's Falkirk, Stirling or Clacks. Obviously I cover all of them so I can see them. The ways on the screens to report it is your standard ones. If it's happening and it's ongoing at that time, it's 999. There's no doubts about that. If it's something that's happened, you've got to think about it, and you think, I need to report that, or I just want to get advice, you do the kind of non-emergency routes, whether that's your 101s, come to a police station, or you can report it online. So if you're on the Police Scotland internet page, there's a bit that says contact us, and there's I'll give you information on hate crime, but you fill in the form, that gets put into our service centre and then recorded as an incident. So even though it's not done over the phone, it's still recorded in the same way, because it still goes back into the service centre so they can record the details of that before it's passed back out to officers. And Gillian pointed out the third-party reporting centres. So again, that's on our website. We recognise it as an underreported issue. It's an underreported crime. There is work that we're doing with CESREC, with other organisations to encourage when something's wrong, just report it. So those third-party reporting centres are on the Police Scotland website as well, and it's not that it makes it completely anonymous. It gives that assurance that you've kind of almost sense-checked it with someone else, and you are being supported in the right way. It's not just two officers turning up at the door. Like, you can do it at your own time. It's a victim-led approach at that. And these centres, we call them centres. It could be really anything, but they are reviewed all the time as well to make sure that there's still an appropriate channel of doing that, and that the organisation running it is right and proper, basically. We regularly, so part of my team includes equality, diversity and inclusion. That whole portfolio sits with us. So Rebecca Northover's our officer. She's out at groups all the time, whether it's to do with asylum seekers, whether it's to do with LGBT groups, whether it's to do with elder persons groups. There's always some sort of interaction within that. And one of the things we always talk about is how to report. Even I suppose it's not actually in my notes, and it probably should have been, but we've just established another way for British Sign Language. That's such a really difficult, has in the past been such a really difficult community to report crimes to us, because there's a clear communication barrier there, and there isn't enough BSL translators that we can use. So there is technology being used in that sense. There'll be an app launched sometime soon, which will give officers the chance to support BSL users there and then, rather than the indignity of trying to maybe you have to write something down, or the other ways that we try and communicate. So that's just one of the things that we've done to overcome that barrier. And there'll be projects on the go that we'll do. Again, I spoke about Becky Northover, so she's working with A Lavender Lives, the hate crime project, which will launch in Stirling during Hate Crime Awareness Week. So it's just bits that's ongoing to raise that awareness of hate crime, how to report it, and the importance of reporting it. And I suppose we just let us decide in terms of, is it a hate incident which will still be recorded, or is it a hate crime? The first part of my presentation was a bit disjointed due to that technically, so I will put a video which explains all of what I talked about at the start, probably a bit better. I'll put it in the chat and I'll send it on to get it circulated around everybody as well. And then Farah just on to the next bit, I think.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Lee, for that information. So essentially, again, when we were looking at the discussions around about our webinar today, we want to link in with the Scottish Government's hate crime strategy and delivery plan. So we know that there's 3 aims within that. So the first aim is about victim support and prevention. The second aim is all about understanding hate crime. And the third aim is focusing around empowering communities. So as part of our panel discussion and our panel reflections, we're going to ask colleagues to come in and think about these, and basically from their own professional expertise, linking the case study that we looked at about Aya, but also these 3 aims, and within our own professional experiences, how can we in future going forward do better and support young people or just any victim of racially aggravated hate crime. So the first question then I have for our panel members is looking at, there were opportunities within the case study looking at opportunities for early intervention. Could you talk to that at all? And then do you think that there's any opportunity again for a trauma-informed response or any other sort of collaboration that could have taken place to help support Aya in a better way?
Wonder if I could maybe come in there, Farah. So I suppose, for Aya and all children, they tell us about, the harm that they're experiencing in lots of different ways. So it could be through their words, through their behaviour, and obviously in this situation it related to our, our silence. And I think for our roles and our responsibilities, children and young people, is really to slow down enough to listen. They have the right to be heard, and that's obviously incorporated into Scots law now in terms of UNCRC and the children's rights. And I think that slowing down to listen to what young people have to say or what their behaviour shows us is an important part in terms of the child protection system, and that's really what our child protection system should model every day, to listen, believe and then act. So, I think that was kind of just really what I was thinking about when I was hearing Aya's story. And also kind of reflecting on a little bit about what supports we've got in Falkirk for young people who are experiencing harm or, are looking for support with their mental health. And, we are absolutely striving in Falkirk for young people to have access to supports when they need it and at the right time. So, that is a priority in our integrated children's service plan. And there's been a lot of progress made in terms of
Thanks, Leah. I would probably just build on that around that non-criminal space and how we intervene and to understand more around those who are displaying that hate and affecting members of society, as we've talked about and seen in the video clip as well. So just to maybe share a wee bit more information about some of the multi-agency activity that we do across all local authorities in Scotland and ourselves here as well. So for awareness, many of you will have completed prevent training, and if you haven't, I would encourage you to do that on the available online modules, because we've all got a role around about this to tackle hate crime, as it you know, in aim 3 there around about it. So we'd encourage, and we're thinking about where we can provide more learning and development opportunities around about this. But in the non-criminal space, Police Scotland can refer to a multi-agency panel, so a prevent multi-agency panel, and I was just representing adult services at one on Monday actually, where we discussed two adults at risk of radicalisation and their behaviours being linked to hate and prejudice around race and religion. And it's about us sharing information as partners in that non-criminal space to understand more about how we might be able to intervene to prevent that. So these activities happen as well where we get together as partners across health, social work, justice services, police, and discuss cases so that we can really target and support in that non-criminal space. Because often, I suppose, speaking from an adult support and protection lens as well, there can be, you know, we talk about intersectionalities, and there can be unmet need and mental health difficulties, other difficulties with the person that we're concerned about and their behaviours. So it's about us really intervening effectively with those adults as well. So there's a real focus and activity around about this. So yeah, I think education and how we can at all different levels tackle and intervene where we observe hate crime or risk of hate crime.
So thank you for that that insight. That's been really helpful. So kind of thinking about sort of like another aspect, you know, we've talked a lot about hate crime, and I would like to say that, you know, we've established an understanding of what hate crime is and what looks like it. And obviously the purpose of the video was to show something that was like kind of playing out in a realistic situation there. We've mentioned also briefly about, you know, the fantastic work that's being done locally, and, you know, how there's been lots of progress being made. I think looking at victim support, support for young people as well. But I'd be really interested to hear from our panelists as well. What do you feel is the role of professionals when it comes to challenging racism and promoting inclusion? And then again, that sort of, we can take that a bit one step further and saying, what are your thoughts around suicide prevention as a community responsibility as well? I don't know if Gillian, you wanted to come in at all?
Yeah, would you mind repeating that, Farah? Sorry.
Yeah, so if we take the first part, so what in your experience, especially, you know, as a third-party reporting centre, and the things, the sort of cases that you deal with within CESREC, what do you feel is the role of professionals when it comes to challenging racism and promoting inclusion?
So I think that everybody has a role, no matter kind of where you are in the hierarchy of the organisation, whether it's the very the leader of an organisation, or whether you are, you know, a worker that's far removed from that position. We all have a role to play. There will be policies that will come down from maybe top down, but regardless of your professional role, I think that we all have a role to play in order to keep everybody safe in our community, to be that kind of empathetic ear, to allow people to open up effectively. And in order to do that, I think that needs to be there at every stage.
Right, okay, that's quite interesting. And thinking back to the case study of Aya, and we look at the professionals that are within there. So you've got the teacher, for example,
Yeah.
within that school setting, and I think there is quite a lot of emphasis in this scenario with young people. There's a lot of, I think, responsibility put on schools about creating that safe space and about teachers being able to report or kind of step in. What do you feel is the role of schools in this scenario in terms of hate crime and supporting young people who receive racial abuse, and the support for their mental health?
Yeah, so I am not entirely sure what schools already provide in regards to mental health, if they have an officer. I don't know if it's the same for every individual school, if that is a kind of across the board thing, or if that's individually. Certain schools may have more services that are available. But yeah, I think that the schools definitely have a role to play, especially if they are being approached directly by a student. Even if if they don't want to report that as a hate crime, there is still the onus there on them to support them with what they've been experiencing, and to ensure, and trying to maybe think ahead, especially like the video said, you may not think about what steps are going to be affecting that child after they have made that report, the backlash that they may receive from peers inside of school and outside of school. And obviously in the video, very sadly, Aya just thought that was her only maybe way of getting out of that situation, is trying to put herself in that, you know, go through that situation, and trying to maybe have the forethought of, okay, if I don't intervene now, what are the repercussions that could come to this child and any other child in your care?
I wondered if I could maybe add to that, Farah. I suppose, you know, just to kind of highlight, you know, all staff working with children and young people have a duty to care under our Getting It Right for Every Child national policy, to intervene when a child's well-being, is compromised in any way, and that of course would include by bullying, racism, discrimination. So there is a kind of national policy in and around that, and everybody's responsibilities towards that. But I think that it is really important when we're making an assessment of a young person's circumstance that we really do consider that, that holistic approach, think outside of what's happening at home or what's going on at home and think about that wider context. I think that, and that's why I suppose thinking about assessments and looking at different risks of harm in a kind of like a contextual safeguarding approach, it takes that element of protection out with the home and into like peer relationships, into communities. So it provides a wider focus about what might be getting in the way of a child's well-being and development.
Thank you for that, Lee.
Oh, Sarah, on you go. I was just going to add to around that, like particularly the school setting. So from a police point of view, we do have I think there's having worked in a school, and I work closely with the school-based officers across Falkirk. So Falkirk's, I suppose, in a fortunate position that they have a school cop in each school, in each secondary school, I should add, to give that kind of support. And I think when it comes to hate crime specifically, what we have to look at is the ability to give people the tools to have the conversation. So I think that's a big part of what we miss. So if we didn't label a hate crime part of it, if it was an assault that happened in the school, pretty much all staff would probably know how to deal with that within the school setting. I think there's a real uncomfortableness, it's not really a word, but around having a conversation around that extra bit that might be the hate crime aggravator or the reason for the assault or the crime that is actually taking place. So I think that's a big part of what we all do within organisations. Like we would see it as probationers going up to the college. The first time they're probably hearing about what a hate crime is when they go into the college and they're presented with a scenario which turns out to be a hate crime and how to deal with that. If you apply that, that's for us as officers, but if you need to then apply that to anybody on the call who's a member of staff who's supporting a young person or an adult, as Gemma touched on in terms of the prevent stuff, it's that whole holistic view. But I think we really need to give everybody the toolkit to be able to have that difficult conversation and what to do and not be clinical like we've seen in the video as we treat it seriously and I'll tell the head teacher. That's what next? How does that young person feel? How do you actually have that discussion around it? That applies to hate crime and the self-harm suicide part of that. Again, that's another piece of the puzzle where people really struggle to have that conversation around, are you going to self-harm? Are you going to try suicide or the likes? I think that's a big part of what we all need to try and instill.
I think that's one thing that you just mentioned there is about when first times probation officers, when they learn about hate crime is when they actually go into the training, when they go into the college, apologies. And I'm just thinking, well, imagine how many number of young people have actually grown up learning about hate crime, because that's something that they have to deal with from like a very, very early stage, age and stage in life as well. So it's just quite, it just goes to show the difference in experiences that people have and the different perspectives that they have. But just kind of going back to sort of like empowerment as well. So obviously we're all here today within our own specific roles, and we mentioned about child rights. I think there's a really important element of here about empowering young people to say that, you have the right to feel safe. And again, in this case with Aya, for example, that was something that could have came forward a bit stronger to say that, you have the right to feel safe. You have the right to, a healthy life. And it helps young people, and even just generally people who are victims of hate crime, to say that, you know, I should be able to stand up for myself rather than just having to deal with it against systems that may or may not be working for them, depending on, you know, where you are, what setting that you're in. But I think from now, like say, for example, the last 10 years, there's been such big improvements in terms of how seriously these sort of crimes are taken, and how quickly they can get progressed as well. But maybe what we could do better, collectively, is making people aware of their rights. I know in the past when I've spoke about this and they're like, oh, but you know, what's the point? And it's like, well, you've got the right to feel safe in your own home, or you've got the right to feel safe in school, just as the person who is giving you this, you know, who's being abusive to yourself, you've got the same rights as they do. Just because they're behaving in that way doesn't mean that you have to take it. And I felt that in the past, when I've ever spoken to young people, or even my own children or friends' children, when we talk around about that narrative, it kind of makes them think, all right, okay, because they're so young and they can be inspired and motivated so quickly, and that shapes how, you know, how they'll grow up and how they'll perceive things as well. So I think there's quite something that we can take away on that, from that as well, in terms of the information that we get across, about the visibility as well, you know, of what's acceptable, unacceptable behaviours, etc.
Yeah. Farah, I was just going, it was one of the bits just to come in that I was just thinking, it was when Gillian was speaking earlier on, and I was just thinking, you know, what can we all take away? And, you know, that we've all got a role and responsibility. And you were asking about different workforce levels, different roles and things. And Gillian was sharing that example that minority groups, sometimes they'll come with a different, present with a different issue. And I just think there's things that we can all bear in mind, just around our routine inquiry and how we question and our curiosity, how we maybe ask some open questions, you know. Maybe the example Gillian gave was around housing, but, you know, how are, you know, just open questions. Is there anything else that's worrying you at the moment? You know, just that we can be alert to that, knowing that could be a factor, so that we can maybe receive that information and be able to act on it, if we're curious in that way. And just the outline of the service, it's so great that we've had Gillian coming along and raising information about the excellent work that CESREC do across Central Scotland, because I'm sure there's much more to what you've fitted into the presentation, Gillian, but I think we all need to make sure that we're knowledgeable and identify opportunities for when we can refer in and give people really good information about what supports that they can get through CESREC as well. So there's lots of things just through our discussion and the issues that we're discussing today that we can all take away and integrate into our practice on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think it's an important thing as well. You're saying, you know, kind of asking open-ended questions, is being mindful that potentially not even in that first, second, third time that you're meeting with that young person or adult, it may take them on the fourth time that you've asked that question, the fifth time that you've asked that question. I think it's important to not kind of see it as, okay, I've asked that once, I never have to go back and ask that again. It's kind of ensuring that you're leaving that open at every stage of communication, either with the young person or an adult.
And talking about questions, I think we should swiftly move on to our next session, because I do see that there's some quite good questions that are in the chat as well. So Phil, could you present some of the questions and we can have a discussion around the answers to them as well?
Yeah, sure. So most of the questions are to do with education and trying to find out resources. It's really encouraging that people want to know more about this in detail. And the easy question to answer, first of all, is will this webinar be available after this event? Yes, it's being recorded, so people can see that. whenever they choose to look at it. Is there national guidance and support available for education services managing challenging situations within the school environments? And we've spoke a little bit about that, but I was wondering if there was anything more specific that the panel can offer around training within an educational establishment for teachers, maybe, and other staff members to deal with those situations.
I think that probably should come to me, Phil, but I suppose it's definitely not my area of expertise in terms of education, but Sarah did highlight the information that I was already kind of aware of in terms of the guidance available to teachers addressing racism and racist incidents in school. So there is national kind of guidance around for education establishments in and around that. And they also have Respect for All national approach to anti-bullying, and that also covers prejudice-based bullying in educational establishments as well. So that's kind of the national support that's around there as well. But Gemma also mentioned that kind of training and development, and we know the education staff do undertake prevent training every year, I believe. That's part of their core training, so that message is continually being fed into schools and to those with kind of a child protection lead role. So that's ongoing, and it's a routine part of learning development, I suppose, for teachers. It's not a one-off training opportunity. It's something that continues, and I know I can see a member of the team kind of pinging along, probably updating us more about that. But that's probably a really succinct answer to that question, I guess, Phil, based on the information I know.
What about any specific support available that might be available for supporting teaching staff where discussions in the playground, for example, amongst parents don't quite meet the standards for or the criteria for hate crime, but is certainly stirring up hatred? Is there any general stuff, and Lee, you might be able to input on this?
I think we would generally be looking back at that GIRFEC approach around looking at that, making a holistic assessment. I suppose it is about, well, what is getting in the way of that child's needs and development. Some of that might be about parenting, it might be about their environment, it is about making a really clear assessment about some of that. But I suppose I was also thinking about, well, what interventions can be available for those young people who are maybe causing the harm or who are being pulled into that, or closer to offending. And Falkirk use SACRO, which is a youth justice service that, and that is that kind of whole ethos about getting in early, trying to avoid any reoffending, look at like restorative justice, mediation, so that those services are available, and schools can refer into that service, as can other kind of services like social work, etc. So I suppose what we would want to see is that kind of multi-agency discussion about what is in the best interest of that child, and these types of scenarios. We're not just focusing on the kind of victim in that. We're having to think about what about the person who is potentially causing the harm, and what's getting in the way of their development, and be pushing them more towards that kind of path of causing harm to another person. So there's two bits to that for schools, which I think could be pretty complex, but they have to consider all the children in that scenario. I don't really know if that's answered your question, but I think it
has. Yeah, I'm going to see if our police officer Lee Strang's got anything to add to that as well. Thanks, Lee.
This happened in the last call that we were getting. The two Lees got mixed up.
Yep.
No, so from what I think, I'd go back to again Gemma's point around that PMAP discussion. So that's where we would pick up through whatever referral part that looks like. So any statutory agency can make that PMAP referral, and as part of that again sits in my portfolios. So we have oversight of that. So it's good in a sense for where I sit. I can tie a lot of things together, or my team can tie a lot of things together. So that kind of covers that piece. But that I would implore everybody, if you've not done your prevent training, please go and do it, because it's a statutory requirement. I'm just going to put that a bit in there. But that wider piece around like criminalising children, Lee obviously touched on Sacro. So again, like there is other ways to refer in. So as a police officer, we would use vulnerable persons database. Every organisation has their own kind of way of capturing that vulnerabilities. But the reason I touch on our one is the sense of you made, or somebody made the example of, if it was like overhearing something a parent said or something like that, that is captured within that. So we would fill in a vulnerable person's report as part of the database. When we're capturing the young person's part in that, we follow the scenario, so it has to be filled in. And obviously that there's elements of that where actually we will highlight the fact that a parent has said this to their child whilst we've been present, or maybe the child or young person has said, oh, but my dad says, or my mum says, or my brother says. So that would get captured. So it's just another way of kind of looking at that whole approach. And so most of us probably on this webinar were at the Keeping the Promise event yesterday, and I think I spent most of the day complaining that actually none of our systems probably talk to each other, so we're relying on that, all of us speaking to each other. There probably will never be a world where one system talks to everything that we all need. So I think that's again something that I would always advocate, is that we all talk to each other, and I suppose it fits in with hate crime. It also fits in with the prevent stuff. Is we've had an incident in Forth Valley where little people knew little bits of different things till it amounted into something bigger, which it ended up becoming a prevent case. But it only became a prevent case after the person had effectively committed a crime. Nothing serious. Nobody was hurt, anything like that. But when we actually start to look at it, there is that element of loads of people knew different things. And that kind of takes it away from the hate crime bit, but there was hate crime elements in it, and that's the bit that we would tie it all together for. I hope that answers that question.
Thanks, Lee. The other question I've got here is about if you're a staff member or a volunteer, and it's a really key question, I think, because obviously when a hate crime is ongoing, it can be quite a volatile situation that staff members can find themselves in. And the person's asking, it's Eloise that's asking, is there any training available for staff and volunteers across community groups to help them safely and confidently de-escalate situations like that? I'll come to yourself, Farah, but I think there's, with the interest here around training and education and people trying to upskill themselves, there may be an opportunity here for us as a public protection lead officers group to produce a one-page training guide where people can find training, and we can speak about that afterwards. But Farah, if you've got any thoughts on de-escalation training in these kind of situations, that would be helpful.
That's actually something that I've been inquiring about myself, and it's something that I'm wanting to personally look into as well. I know we do have officers within housing, for example, that offer mediation, etc. But I think that's something that would be really valuable to sort of take back away from this webinar, and maybe say that there is a demand for this type of training with colleagues.
That's great. Thanks, Farah. And just to clarify, all the legislation that you were speaking about, Lee, that applies as much to online as it does offline?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's it covers that. There is also, it's the same as kind of hate crime can be an aggravator or it can be the crime itself. So there will be other, if it's online, it may come under what we would call the Communications Act with a hate crime aggravator, or taking it back to Aya's story, like that would 100% fall within the legislation. The fact that she has received messages, whether that's on a text message, a WhatsApp, a social media post, calling her, that is a crime. That there's no ifs or buts. That is a hate crime. So that falls within the legislation. It goes back to that. If you think that's pretty obvious, there was other things in that scenario that you're kind of like sending the pictures of the snake, like that might not fall, if you don't know the context, fall within something. but there would be some element of a Communications Act crime within that we do that. And the lead up to that goes back to that immediate, during or after, where there's some sort of hate element, whether an aggravator is attached to that. So yes, in short, all the legislation is covered physically and online.
Thanks, Lee. That's helpful. Gemma, I'm wondering, are these Q&A, is there an option to continue for people to ask questions after the webinar's finished?
I was thinking absolutely along the same lines as you felt. There's such rich questions and things being shared, both within the chat and the questions. And I think it's an ongoing discussion, and for us to think about this more fully as a public protection lead officers group and our other working groups through committees. So we'll absolutely pull it all together, capture all the links that have been shared, all the discussions and questions in the Q&A, and make sure that we don't lose all of that and share it around the group. So absolutely we'll make sure that we capture that, because we've already discussed we can share the presentation. We're going to be sharing the information shared by Stacey through our suicide prevention coordinator, so we can pull together things as well. So yeah, absolutely.
That's great. Thanks, Gemma. I'll hand back to yourself, Farah.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Phil. And it's been absolutely great for everybody being here. I was actually wondering, Gemma, we've got a feedback questionnaire on how you thought today's session went, and obviously looking for constructive feedback and seeing how we can improve. So we'll get that in the chat if that's possible, Gemma, and then obviously send up as a follow-up link as well. Keep your questions coming, keep your comments coming, and if there's anything that we can answer, we've got a couple of minutes left. But in the meantime, it's been absolutely wonderful to have everybody here. I think I'm going to stop sharing actually, if I can, because it'll be nice to actually see colleagues that are on the call. But yeah, it's been wonderful. I think we've had some very rich discussions. We've talked about, hate crime. What is hate crime? What's the purpose of this new legislation? Looking at things in the current context. As well, we've got quite prevalent local issues that are going on, and that there is a ripple effect going on within the wider communities as well. But just bearing in mind, although today's discussion was focusing on racially aggravated hate crime, we've got other characteristics as well that are involved. And I think one of the other biggest things that we've taken away, that should be taken away, is within the roles that are on here today, is about having that conversation, open-ended questions, understanding what maybe there's some further things underlying within that, and again, empowering people over their rights. Obviously, as the Equalities and Human Rights Officer, I'm going to be saying that as well, making sure with children and young people, but also members of the public, people who are victims, even perpetrators, should know that, we have to respect each other's rights, and everybody, we just want to live in a safe and cohesive society. So I think that was my roundup. So I will apologies for any blunders, etc. But thank you so much for everybody taking the time out of their lunch times to join us today, and we will get the links and resources, etc. that have been shared within the chat, within the Q&A, sent to follow up to everybody who's registered. So thank you so much, and thank you especially to our guest panellists, Lee Strang and Gillian Curry from Police Scotland and Central Scotland Regional Quality Council for taking the time out as well to join us today. Your inputs have been very, very appreciated and insightful. Thank you so much.